See if that awareness that we've been talking about all weekend is still there. Before we go looking for it, just check in and see, I wonder if that awareness is still present. Simple inquiry. So before we go looking for it, is it already present? It's present to the degree, actually, that we are absent. We as a separate thinking, figuring it all out person are just absent for a moment. But that awareness is already present. Yes? No, maybe. It's a really useful thing to do. You don't need to actually sit for 40 minutes to find it, right? If you recognize that, no, it's actually functioning already, and I may not be paying attention to it, when I'm cooking breakfast or, putting gas in my car or whatever, but whenever I stop and think, well, I wonder if it's still doing its thing, right? And you can just check in. Oh, yeah, it's still present. And the suggestion is to do that often, like often during the day. Just say, I wonder, like right now, is it present now? And then after a while, we catch on that it's always present. Our attention, in other words, where we put our focus may be somewhere else. But even when our attention is over there, what's noticing it is still conscious. And then we just turn the attention back and to the awareness itself and say, oh, okay, it's still there. And you do that, I don't know, about 1,000,000 times, and then you realize it's there. It's there whether we're paying attention to it or not. Sort of like breathing in a sense. I mean, we can pay attention to it and notice the breathing, or we can be doing something else and forget all about the fact that we're breathing, and yet it's still happening. Fortunately, right? If it was dependent on us remembering it, none of us would make it this far, would we? So the way we've been talking about this awareness all weekend is sort of like it's a local thing. I can access it. It's nearby. Something sort of feels like sort of in the vicinity of the body, right? Biology, I mean, we all learned this growing up. So biology, science assumes that it's the brain that generates consciousness. Somehow it's a function of our brain cells. They've never found that. They've never found the chemical reaction that produces consciousness. But that's the assumption, that the consciousness is sort of a byproduct of this body. But again, we can go back to, what's the belief and what do we actually know? Do we actually know that the consciousness that we can all experience, do we know for a fact that that's actually a sort of a byproduct of our thinking mind? Do we know that, or is that just an assumption? And if it's just an assumption, it's worthy to ask, well, what if it wasn't? What if it was somehow more primary than this body-mind? How would that change things? What if, this is just an alternative, I'm not saying, therefore believe this, but just as an inquiry on our own time, if we sense into this awareness, we can inquire about it. And say, well, is this awareness the product of this thinking mind, or is it possible that awareness is something more primary? Is it possible that it's actually awareness enlivening these bodies rather than these bodies creating awareness? Right? I mean, it sounds like a fine philosophical point, right? But it makes an enormous difference. If consciousness is a product of the mind, the brain, these bodies, this brain will at one point cease. So if that's true, if the consciousness is a function of brain cells, then at some point consciousness, our awareness of anything, would cease. That's the consequence of that understanding. And the hope for a lot of people is somehow I'll make some quantum leap into some other dimension and somehow I'll continue. The other possibility has other implications. Again, it doesn't do us any good to believe it just because we like the outcome better. But the outcome is different. If consciousness is what enlivens these bodies, if it what pre-exists these bodies, if it's what's more fundamental than these body minds, the bodies can drop away. No, that consciousness that we've been pointing to all weekend, even though it feels local, feels like somehow it's produced in this vicinity, we don't actually know until we really investigate that, really leave that open as a question. And it's really important not to try to come up with the right answer. Just allow the question to be. When I really stop and think about it, I don't actually know what produces this thing that I casually refer to as consciousness, awareness. I can experience it, I know it exists, feels close to home, may feel spacious, but I can't say with any certainty where it originates from. Beautiful, the mystery, right? We know it exists, we don't know, but there's not too much we can say about it. I mean, there's a few things we can say about it. Without it, the world doesn't exist. As far as you're concerned, no consciousness, no world. So it has that going for it. But then at that point, when we're really willing to inquire about that awareness at that point, we can also ask ourselves the question, so I wonder if it's a personal awareness, I wonder if it's my awareness versus awareness. In other words, is there one awareness here, another one over there? Everyone has their own separate packaged awareness? Or is it possible that there is just awareness and it functions through this set of conditioning and it looks like this, it functions through another person and it looks like that? Again, I'm not suggesting we believe anything, I'm just suggesting a worthy inquiry, Like, I wonder if that's true. I wonder if that's possible. You know, and if we don't know, it's really helpful to be honest with ourselves in this arena. If we don't know, it's okay to say, well, actually, I don't know. It's a lot better, a lot more useful to say, I don't know, than to say, no, I've convinced myself and I believe this so thoroughly that I know this. Right? Still founded on the quicksand of belief. Right? Fundamentally a belief, but I really, really, really hope it's true. So what we can say just logically, that whatever is true is true. I may not know what that is, but if it's true, it's true, whether I believe it or not, right? I may believe the opposite. You know, whatever's true doesn't care, gives us that freedom. But there's something that's true. There's something there's something that exists, something that's real. That's what I mean by true. What is real, independent of whatever I believe about it. So if we're willing to inquire that way about just awareness, consciousness, you know, is it possible that it's not really my awareness that I'm in charge of? It's really awareness that is noticing whatever's happening to me, whatever thoughts I have. But it's something much, much vaster than what I am. And it feels sort of elusive. We can experience it. We can know that it exists. And yet if we try to grab a hold of it like we would grab a hold of anything else, it's sort of elusive. You know, so it's sort of like a kindergarten riddle. You know, what can't you grasp, but you can't lose? You know, you can't quite grasp it, put it in a box, define it too well, and yet you can't lose it. It's always there. Every time you check in, well, there it is. So if we're willing to go down that inquiry, if we're willing to be honest with ourselves about what we really know, and you know, just set aside what we may believe to be true or have been taught to be true, just set that aside as a, you know, well, maybe, maybe not. I don't actually know. So I'll just set that aside and go looking for what is revealed in my own direct experience. So if we go down that road that we just described and notice that there's this awareness that at some point doesn't feel personal anymore. We start out on this journey thinking, I'm doing it for me, doing it for my peace, my joy, my happiness, my fulfillment, and we find out, if we go down the path long enough, that it's actually not that about that at all. It's about something, the recognition that what we are is much vaster than any personal ambition. And from that perspective, where there's this awareness that's at some point an undeniable presence at the core of what we are, from that perspective, if we can see it in ourselves, we can see it in everybody else already. When the Buddha had his awakening, he was reported to have said, "I and all beings have simultaneously awakened." Right? He could see it in himself, he'd see it everywhere. Already present. You know, in this person over here, maybe that awareness is still confused. You know, still, you know, challenged by all kinds of conceptual thoughts, all kinds of beliefs, and the appearance, the speech, the actions reflect that. Right? The essence is still untainted. Right? So in Christianity, you know, one of the big tenets is, you know, love thy neighbor as thyself. The problem is that egos have a really hard time doing that. They can try to be good for a long time until it's inconvenient, or until, you know, they find out the other person doesn't actually like them, or, you know, until their neighbor has a barking dog on Sunday morning. You know, there's, you know, when it's convenient, great. And, you know, I'm all for that effort. But the problem is that it's still effort. The ego can only make the effort to love. But when it's recognized that, you know, the neighbor actually fundamentally is not other than oneself, that changes everything. When it's seen that sort of the one essence appears like that over there, like this over here, like this here, there's a compassion, right? There's a that love isn't dependent on the circumstances, right? That peace of that recognition isn't dependent on the circumstances. Peace that surpasses all understanding, right? Doesn't make sense, there's still peace. That's not, an ego can't do that. If circumstances aren't going its way, ego has a problem with that. But from this point of view of awareness, it all doesn't seem quite so serious. You know, there's not a personal self that's at threat all the time, vulnerable all the time. You know, we're free to engage the world, not just get away from the world, which is the motivation of a lot of spiritual people. Like, I just want out of here. I just want to transcend it and feel good. You know, drug addicts, same thing. I just want out of here, feel good, worry about everything else later. And when we get to that point, spiritually, which is sort of the permanent fix, right? Not, I'll get high and then come down, get high, come down. Permanent fix is seeing what we actually are is actually already free. Beautiful, you know, to transcend that grip of who I am is what I think about myself. When we transcend that, it's incredibly freeing. Feels like, we've thrown off a 200-pound backpack that we didn't even know we were carrying. But it's not the end of the story. It's like halfway around the circle. I'm free of this world. The other half of the circle is, am I free enough to be in this world? Am I free enough to function wholeheartedly out of a sense of love and compassion in the recognition that it's all one happening? You can call it whatever you want, but it's all one manifestation, one existence, one blooming, one expression. Are we free enough to fully participate in that, to fully enjoy that, to fully find ourselves just in awe of that magnificence? That's the coming home part. So what may start out as sort of an individual endeavor, I'm doing this for my own benefit, for my own peace of mind, for my own joy, happiness, get rid of my busy mind, whatever our initial motivation is. Life will use whatever lure works. But if we really go deeply enough in this, we find out that it's really about something else altogether. It's really about something much bigger in terms of how we are in this world. And so what may start out as sort of an individual, self-centered endeavor, my dad used to accuse me of gazing at my navel all day. It sounds very self-centered. But at the end of the day, without that sense of it is all one expression, that whatever awakeness is here is also present in everyone else equally already. Without that understanding, we end up with a world as it is appearing now, right? Where the earth is something else, something just to extract things from. The oceans are things just to dump things into. The air is things that we discharge chemicals into. Other people are to be exploited, controlled. Fear is a tool. That's the result of egoic consciousness. So what's at stake may start out seeming quite personal, but I would suggest this is important work. Now, one of the challenges of traditional religion is, it's called, religious scholars called it the problem of evil, right? If God's so great and, loving and everything, how come there's all this evil around? So there's all kinds of solutions to that. One is you just create some other entity and say, well, it's his fault. But just taking, aside from, cosmic forces and all of that, that we can only speculate about, we can just look at life on this earth and see that nature isn't evil, may be competitive, and some things may eat other things, but they don't do it out of a malicious sense, right? A tiger isn't evil. It's just being a tiger. Snake just does what a snake does. A tree may shade another plant. It's how things are. But there's also this incredible harmony that you look outside and you see things exist in, we recognize it as beauty. Then we have humans, right? But what creates this sense of malevolence? It's not the trees, it's not the animals, it's not the sharks or snakes, or it's not that, right? It's human mind. Go of consciousness. It's like I've got to look out for myself, and I'm going to do whatever I need to make me happier, me more secure, me more famous. That movement. And whatever is achieved, it's never quite enough. So more power, more money, more fame. That movement is what creates what we see on the evening news. And in my opinion, it's great to pass laws and elect other, maybe more conscious people, etc. But and we can sort of whittle away at the problems and who knows, maybe even solve global warming and whatever. But it's the underlying attitude that allows us to dump chemicals in rivers, to pump things into the air, to poison our food supply. All of that is a result of ego consciousness, greed, wanting more and more. So the antidote to that isn't, better laws, different politicians. Ultimately, it is a change of how we view ourselves and other people, fundamentally. And until we recognize that who the other person is, whether it's another country, another religion, another race, whatever, until we recognize that there is exactly the same consciousness operating there, the same manifestation of, you could say, the divine manifested in that way there, no different than here. And that's the source of love, compassion, that's not dependent on outcome, not dependent on whether we like it or not, right? Our mind still may not like it. That's different than understanding that it is also an expression of the One. So this can start out as a personal endeavor, and what I'm suggesting this morning, it's actually important in a larger sense. And when I was talking with Linda the other night about, yogis and, personal accomplishments, that's wonderful to be respected, and yet what I said the other night is that what seems to be called for now is something more than that, something where we bring that awareness into this life as an expression of it. However that looks, it'll look different for everybody, but actually when we move from that recognition that the other is already same essence as ourselves, when we move from that, we're not trying to fix people, we're not trying to change people. There's an underlying respect, there's love, there's compassion. Not because we're trying to do it, not because we think that if we're good enough we'll get into heaven or get enlightened or something. We do it because it makes sense. We do it because to do anything else hurts. It's not an option anymore. That changes the game. And I don't actually think that we have all that much time to figure that out either. So given the fact that we just contemplated the end of the world, does anybody have any questions? Or